Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. This is amazing grace. Welcome. This is Aloe Ministries, where we set the captives free. For this broadcast, I want to share two revelations last night. One was a vision and the other was a dream. But before I get to that, I want to speak about something regarding Christianity. Yesterday I saw a video that a young man did, and he was speaking about upcoming presidential election here in the United States. And his conclusion was he was not going to vote. And a part of the message was basically being focused on the things of God, being in the world but not of the world. But before I get into those dreams and visions, I start by saying, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for and not to vote for. Do what the Lord tells you to do. If the Lord for some reason tells you to abstain from voting, then by all means. But what I'm going to caution you before getting into dreams and visions is do not allow being so what you call heavenly minded that you know earthly good. In Daniel 2, Daniel lets us know that the Lord puts king in places and he pulls them down. If you are in a society where you have to cast your vote, it is important that you get into the process. You don't have to be a politician. There are men of God in the Bible who are involved in politics. As a governor, Joseph had to be in politics. Daniel, as a governor, one of the chief princes, he had to be involved in politics. David, as a king, involved in politics. So do not let your Christianity stop you from getting involved in things that will impact you. Because one thing you may find is, for example, the Lord gives you someone to vote for, but because you don't vote for that person, someone else gets put in place and they make laws that come against you, and you have nothing to say because the Lord gave you an opportunity to vote, but you didn't exercise that right. And a part of that, to illustrate the point, because sometimes what we as Christians want to do, we want to say, well, I'll pray for you. In some aspects, like, don't just pray, slay. And not to go out and kill anyone, but sometimes you have to be willing to get your hands dirty. And the example I'll use, yeah, Esther was big time. Thank you for that, Leah. Because also another thing, there are people where the Lord doesn't want you to simply vote. He wants you to run for office. There's a friend of mine, the same person the Lord had me tell her that he was going to bless her, actually with a child that she had basically 8 months later. A couple of months ago, the Lord had me contact him and was like, have you considered running for office? I won't get into it, but the Lord is calling her to run for office. So for some of you, you want to be so heavily minded, not only does the Lord want you to vote, he wants you to run for office. The Lord had me do the painting where there was a judge's robe in front of the church. A part of like this season where many churches are closed is to get people outside the church walls. But the church walls isn't simply the walls of a building. It's the walls around the mind. And a part of this about getting involved in things and not just simply saying, well, I'm just going to pray, is John 11 of all places. And I'll start in verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So the sister sent word to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. And by the way, he whom you love, God has a tender side, but he's not moved by emotions, because there are people who are doing things based on emotions, but it's contradicting the will, the word, and the way of God. So it's not all about emotions. And the Lord loved Lazarus. And it continues. When Jesus heard this, he said, "This sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he then stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. And a part of that, because the Lord doesn't respond to your cries immediately, it doesn't mean he doesn't love you. And if he responds to someone before you, it doesn't mean he loves that person more than you. Again, Jesus said it was going to be for the glory of God. And your situation is for the glory of God. And the dreams and the visions, or dream and vision I'm about to share, is for the glory of God. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you are going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." And he said, after that, he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep." Then the disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover." Now, Jesus had spoken of his death. So the Lord allowed Lazarus to die. But the Lord said this to be for the glory of God. But they thought he was speaking of literal sleep, which is also nothing. When the Lord speaks, you have to know what he said and also what it means. The Lord spoke about destroy this temple in 3 days, rebuild it. But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Others mistook it as being the temple that was built to God. So Jesus then said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and I am glad." Also nothing. Jesus wasn't around Lazarus. Someone didn't come and tell Jesus that Lazarus was dead. He knew it. So no matter what you're going through, the Lord knows exactly where you are. So it's not like he doesn't see, and it's not like he doesn't care. "And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Therefore, Thomas, who's called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Thomas wasn't like, "Well, let's just pray for Lazarus." No, they're about to get their hands dirty. They're about to get involved, even if it costs them. Now, I'm not going to tell you to go out and campaign for different politicians, because ultimately we serve the Lord. In fact, yesterday another thing I saw was a famous preacher, one of his sons, speaking about being on the Lord's side. That's a part of it, being on the Lord's side. But there are some cases where we have to point people in the right direction to open their eyes to certain things. But ultimately, it's about campaigning for the Lord and his will here on the earth. So please, do not get so heavenly minded that you know earthly good, as the saying goes. That you're thinking, well, I'm a Christian, I'm in the world, but I'm not of it, so I'm not going to get involved in these things. Because the things you don't get involved with, other people make a decision for you, and you will suffer the consequences. And believe me, there are people in other countries, they pray, they wish, they're hoping they'll get a chance like you to be able to impact the leadership of their country. Because there's a saying that people get the leaders they deserve. So when you have a chance to vote, don't say you're going to abstain from, or please don't say you're going to abstain from voting because you're a Christian and you're not getting involved in those things. As if all you really care about is that you can go to church. Because there's some politicians in charge right now. Like if people want to protest for BLM or some other protests, it's like there's nothing regarding COVID. But next thing you know, they're speaking about church services. And if you're not looking at those individuals and saying, you know what, maybe I need to try to replace them with someone else, your vote counts. So again, please don't fall for this snare of that you're a Christian, that you're in this world and you're not of it, and you're not going to get involved in certain things. If you don't make a decision, the decision will be made for you. Yesterday, Dr. Arleza mentioned that where Jesus said he wishes you were hot or cold. If you're lukewarm, he'll spit you out of his mouth. That speaks where if you don't make a decision, he will make it for you. Likewise, if you have the opportunity to vote and you don't, someone will make choices for you. So I start that. And also in saying that is to kind of give people a chance to log on regarding the dream and the vision. The first thing that happened was I had a vision. I was in my living room last night. Now, it may not sound spectacular, but again, this is for the glory of God. I was in my living room last night. I closed my eyes and I had a quick vision. And if I tell you the vision beforehand, you may be thinking, like, there's no scripture for that. But in the same gospel according to John, in John 21, it states, after these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and he manifested himself in this way. Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will come with you. They went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. So they're coming up empty-handed. And what this vision addressed was something I was coming up empty-handed with. I was striking out. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. Yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, children, you don't have any fish, do you? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will catch a fish. So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. So the men went fishing, and it wasn't working for them. But at the right time, the Lord told them, cast your net on the right side of the boat. And they came in with a haul. A part of my journey, especially the last 5 years, the enemy has thrown a lot of witchcraft attacks against me. And one of the things the enemy has been coming at are my eyes. Not necessarily my natural eyes, but my spiritual eyes, to see the things of the Lord. I remember back in 2014, the Lord has given me a lot of visions, but I wasn't really paying attention to them. Some I was, some I wasn't. If you were to check my dream journal, it is literally a dream journal as opposed to a visionary journal, because for the most part I was just writing down dreams. I was having visions but not really paying much attention to them. But since the enemy has been coming after my visual gifts, one of the things the Lord has used that to do is to train me, because the things I wouldn't pay attention to before, I pay attention to now. And also because of the numbers of attacks that I have been exposed to. Whenever I have a dream or vision from God, it is even more special. Jesus said that he would not leave us comfortless, but he would have the Holy Spirit as our comforter to guide us into all truth. And the vision was simple, but at the same time, it touched me deeply. Because if you receive anything from the Lord, knowing how magnificent he is, also how busy he is, and for him to take his time out to address anything in your life, if you've lost your awe for the Lord and you don't think this is an honor, if you're not grateful for it, then you may want to check yourself. And it may sound so simple again, but it meant so much to me. I mentioned that last week I painted my deck. There was also some carpentry work involved. So it took a lot of effort, but got that done. But there was something else I was working on, and it was a plumbing project. If you've ever worked on a plumbing project, and when you turn water on, it starts leaking, that means you failed. You need to address it. Well, I kept on working on this plumbing project, and it just wasn't working. And I even bought the items that I bought before, and I basically started from scratch. Even watched some videos on YouTube. It was still leaking. And then yesterday when I closed my eyes, in fact, at one point I was like, maybe I need to tighten stuff up. And I tightened a nut so tight, and it was plastic, that it broke. So I had to get another one. So it was taking a long time to finish a project that was basically a 5-minute deal. But it was taking a while to get it done. And I remember there was something I was doing along the way, but I wasn't sure where something belonged. And a part of the reason why this is about 2 rings was the first ring is based on this vision of a washer. And when I closed my eyes last night, I saw a washer being moved from basically back to the front. So it's kind of like how the Lord told them to cast your net on the right side. I had a washer on the wrong side. And it doesn't even make sense, now that I think about it, how that was causing a leak. But yesterday I tightened the components, and then I moved the washer from basically the back to the front. And when I filled the sink up, and I looked, and there was no leak. It was amazing. So like testing the spirits, the way I had the vision, it was just so random. And it seemingly offered the solution. Because a lot of times we can say, well, I had a dream or a vision. But how does this thing bear fruit in the natural realm? So then I changed the washer from the back to the front. And it didn't seem as if it would make a big difference. And next thing you know, it's not leaking anymore. And I did the experiment twice. And then this morning, doing it again. And it reminds me of Judges 6 with Gideon with the fleece. Let the ground be dry, the fleece be wet, and vice versa. I had a piece of napkin down underneath. It was dry. At one point I had a small trash can underneath, and it was dry, and it needed to be. But it also spoke about how sometimes when the Lord delivers you of something, for one, it may have been something persistent, but how the solution is just so simple. But it's just a matter of waiting for the Lord's timing. Like with Lazarus in John 11, no amount of praying or fasting was going to cause the Lord to move any faster. Lazarus needed to die for God to be truly glorified, to show that Jesus is the resurrection. But it meant so much to me last night that the Lord took the time to give me a vision. And some people have had this, where they're working on some like complex mechanical issues, and the Lord shows them in a dream, move this, do this, or this is what this should look like. If you've seen the painting of the hibiscus that I did, that was based on a dream the Lord gave me several months ago. And that dream became reality. So these things, in Genesis 50:20, Joseph spoke about what his brothers tried using for harm, the Lord was using for good and to save many lives. So like the enemy coming at me with witchcraft, and a lot of times by attacking me in dreams, in visions, it caused me to pay attention to those things. And what the enemy tried using for harm, the Lord is using for good. Also one of the things, when the Lord tells me to do something, I'm not lax in doing it. So last night when I got the revelation, I got up, I went and started working on a project, and voila, it was fixed. And this vision is seemingly more simple, with less impact than the dream that I had at about 3 o'clock this morning. But when I was praising the Lord, I wasn't sure which one to praise Him for more. The vision or the dream. Again, the dream is, in a sense, much more impactful. But the vision, it solved something, and to think that the Lord will look down upon me and to let me know in a vision, move this to the other side. Kind of like with Peter, and they were out in the water, and what I was dealing with had to do with the water. I was coming up empty-handed. And I've never had a plumbing project or any project around the house take so long because things weren't working. It also speaks about how sometimes we try doing things outside of God's timing. And no matter how much we force it, it's not working because He has not opened the door to us. And how when He opens the door to us, how things just flow effortlessly. And there are no leaks. So I praise the Lord, and it's for His glory regarding that vision and how it solved a problem. A vision that lasted a split second solved an issue that I've been dealing with for weeks. So I praise Him for that. Now for the dream. And the same way I start off by reading scripture before telling you the vision, I'll do the same. And this dream is linked to Genesis 24. And the reason why I call this message 2 rings. The first ring was a washer. The second ring was about a wedding. In Genesis 24, Abraham said that an angel would go ahead of his servant to find a wife for his son Isaac. The servant found Rebekah, and when he was bringing her back, start verse 62 of Genesis 24, it states, "Now Isaac had come from going to Beer Laharoi, for he was living in the Negev. Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming." And camels bring resources. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. She said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "He is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And as I was reading that, a big part of this, it says, when the servant said, "He's my master," then she took her veil and covered herself. And the bride that the Lord has for me, literally one day I saw her, and He had her cover herself in a way that I didn't quite understand back then, but is linked to Genesis 24, the way she covered herself. And that was admirable. But last night, it was about how the enemy tried covering himself. Last night I had a dream around 3 o'clock in the morning. I was in what looked like a wedding boutique. I think there's a program on TV called, it may still be on, Say Yes to the Dress. I think there's also another one like it or others like it, where people go in and they try on wedding dresses and the family will either say yay or nay. Well, I was in this boutique and it's like I was dressed even though I couldn't see myself. I was dressed and ready for my bride. And there were like clothes or dresses that formed an aisle. And I was waiting for my bride, and I saw women coming up and be like, "No, that's not her. No, that's not her. No, that's not her." And it's like, "Where's my bride? No, that's not her." And there was a man with me, and it's like he was my best man, but I never really saw his face, and I didn't know him. And it's kind of like, "Where's my bride?" And I felt like maybe she showed up, but I didn't see her. And then I ended up walking out of the boutique, and there were other people there. I remember I was walking out, and a man, which was a spirit, had his legs stretched out, almost like trying to trip me. But I didn't trip. and basically our shins collided. And I forget the exact words that I said to him, like, did that hurt? And not did that hurt like I'm checking to see how he's doing. It's because did that hurt because you're trying to trip me and it didn't work. And if you've ever seen Muay Thai, a martial arts out of Thailand, you see a lot of shin conditioning where they'll kick someone using their shins to a person's abdomen. And it was that kind of collision of shins. It was like a battle, but I didn't fall. So I walked out of this boutique and I was sitting up a road and I was like, oh, I forgot my vows. Because a sign of my wedding is that I'm supposed to read a poem to my bride. But the poem is actually my wedding vows. The wedding vows the Lord had me write in March 2016. So I was going to get my wedding vows so I'd have it for the wedding. And I ended up in what looked like a hotel. And some people were gathered around for the wedding. But when I was going in, I saw this woman and it was like she was my bride, but all I saw were her lips. And just from her lips, I was like, that's not my bride. And the next thing I saw eyes, but the eyes were gray, but it was more like she was wearing contacts, but the eyes were gray, but they were snake eyes. But I didn't know the lips and eyes belonged to the same person. And I was going up an escalator up to like I was going to my room to go get my wedding vows. And I looked down and I saw behind a column a woman who was supposed to be my bride. And just by seeing her body, it's like I pointed and I looked down and I said, that's not my bride. I said, I'm not marrying her. And it's like one of my family members was there, but everyone else was her family member. But in Genesis 24, Rebecca put on her veil. She was the Lord's chosen bride for him. She put on her veil out of modesty. He was willing to marry her on the day that she met, or the day they met. But the person in the dream was behind this column because the person is trying to hide while trying to marry me. And even before coming on, I'm like, my internet started acting up. I'm like, I left the house to go to the post office. My internet was working fine, but before coming to do this message, the internet started acting up. Because in the dream, I recognize that the woman is a false apostle named Marcella, who's a witch who tried to get me to marry her back in 2015. And that same person appearing in the dream again. I was like, that's not my bride. I'm not marrying her. And a part of this, I have to not simply practice what I preach. I have to preach what I practice. I've said before, my talk is based on my walk. There are certain things the enemy tried that had a measure of success back in times past, but it won't work again. So I woke up, I was amazed. It also speaks about how sometimes where the Lord has someone for you, but maybe the enemy gets to someone, or he's just using a foul spirit that's trying to prevent you from getting married. And then he's trying to quote unquote marry you off in the spiritual realm. So that's what they tried last night. To quote unquote get me to marry someone under false pretenses. I've said before, if you have to pretend to be someone else, that is not for you. If you have to hide something, it is not for you. When I woke up, I was thankful. I thank the Lord that in the dream that I said that. But it shows how people try to hide things, but the Lord will expose it. So I saw pure lips. I'm like, that's not my bride. This is also one of the things why the Lord will show things to you. So that if the enemy comes and tries to get you to do something else, you'll know this is not the Lord's will for me. And I see the thing about renouncing it. In the dream I already said, that's not my bride. The message was already sent. Now, upon waking up, I did pray and I thank the Lord that only His will is going to come to pass in not my life, but the life that He purchased with His blood. Judgment is coming upon entities for this. Humans and spirits. Because they're getting in the way of true living God. And they've been trying this stuff for years. The Lord has been patient. He's been long suffering. But judgment is coming upon them. But it's amazing how the Lord just showed me little. And even if you have a demonic dream, the Lord may be exposing things. Because again, I saw a pair of lips. I'm like, I knew that was my bride. I saw that gray snake eyes. I'm like, I'm not marrying a devil. And I saw the person hiding behind a large column. But I saw enough to know who the person was. And I thank the Lord that in the dream was like, that's not my bride. I am not marrying her. So when it comes to Psalm 7, let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end. So yes, the reason why I call this message 2 rings. The first ring was about a plumbing project. The second was about seeing a false apostle named Marcella, who is a witch, showing me my dream, trying to get me to marry her. God is not mocked. I've said it before many times, that especially when the Lord makes a promise to you, that you have to be vigilant, because you'll be surprised what the enemy try to do in order to come against you. And even coming out with this, I was like last time, like, okay, Lord, you know I'm going to do this, but do I need to call some names? Because one of the things, I don't have problems calling names. But yeah, that was a foul dream. But I thank the Lord that at least in the dream, I'm like, I'm not marrying her. That is not my bride. And when I woke up and I prayed, I was like, Lord, let what I said resonate in that dream throughout all the spiritual realm, in the natural and spiritual realm. That entity is not my bride, and I'm not marrying her. So to recap with the first thing, do not be so super saved that you can't get involved in things that will affect you and other people regarding voting. Second, the vision. The Lord was gracious to give me the answer, to a problem in a vision. Within a split second, He gave me that vision and I acted upon it. Likewise, when the Lord gives you a dream or vision, do not delay in acting upon it. Also, you see how in testing the spirits, in determining if something is from the Lord, how those things are linked to the Bible. Having the dream or the vision of putting the washer from basically the rear to the front, how it is linked to John 21, where Jesus told me to cast your net on the right side. Casting net on the right side. See, sometimes people, they're fishing in another person's lake. They're fishing in another person's sea. And no matter how many times they fish, they're going to keep on coming up empty-handed because the Lord's not with them. Also the vision. Because of the Lord's timing, that His will got done at that time. Also how He just looked down upon me. How I was basically scratching my head. And I don't recall if I specifically asked the Lord to help me with this. But how He just gave me the answer to one of life's issues. Which lets me, it reminds me and it reminds you that the Lord cares about every aspect of your life. If He cares about which side a washer is on in a plumbing project, you better guarantee or you better know He cares which side or who a wedding ring that's on your finger came from. In the second dream of the enemy, and like with the marriage thing, A part of the reason why the poem was significant, like in 2015, I made a covenant with the Lord. I would not kiss a woman until my wedding day. My lips have not touched a woman in at least 5 years. So when I made a covenant, I have kept it. Another thing is, at least one person comes to mind. Actually, two people. In one case, I went to a friend's wedding. The Lord gave me a poem to share at the wedding. In the other case, I actually officiated a wedding, and the Lord wanted me to do this. And a part of His sign that He wanted me to officiate a wedding was He gave me a poem for the couple. So while I was doing the ceremony, I read this poem. And I remember how the stepfather, he was moved by it. So writing the poem was a sign. When the Lord first called me, one of the things He was having me do was write a lot of poetry. I didn't realize they were prophetic until several months later when one actually came to pass. So the poem was significant. So my bride is going to hear some words that came from the Lord for her. And with those words, they're written back in March 2016. Because I remember in the dream, I was like, I hope the vows that I wrote in March 2016, that they will apply to her. Because it would also confirm that the person I'm going to marry is in fact the one the Lord has for me. Because I'm reading that poem and the person standing in front of me doesn't match. Of course, it won't go that far. It doesn't match. Then I know the person is not the one. This is how meticulous the Lord is. He gives you little clues along the way. And one thing is also how, in accordance with Genesis 50:20, the things the enemy tried using for my harm, the Lord is using for good. The enemy tried blinding my eyes spiritually. The Lord still speaks to me via dreams and visions. May not be as much, may not be as often. It has also given me a greater appreciation for when one of those things come. God can block the devil. The devil cannot block God. We serve a God who's unequaled. There is none like Him. Isaiah wrote, he prophesied that God searched the universe all the way through, and He found no other God but Him. He's the creator of all. Yesterday when the Lord had me speak about the brief vision about a serpent eating a squirrel and what would I do? Good is in His hands. Evil is in His hands. So yes, a dream and a vision based on 2 rings. And let only the Lord's good and perfect will be done. And as I said, the 2 rings, and Genesis 50:20 came up. 50, the 0 is a ring. 20, another ring. So I also pray that whatsoever the enemy has been trying to use for evil in your life, that you will know that God will use it for good. And that no weapon formed against you will prosper. As the Lord has said, so shall you do. With Lazarus, the Lord allowed him to get sick, allowed him to pass away, but the Lord showed up and He resolved every single thing. Likewise, no matter how far the Lord allows you to, in a sense, fall in the enemy's hands, in accordance with John. Also another thing. In John 10:1, Jesus said that anyone who comes in through a side gate is a thief and a robber. Proverbs lets us know that no one despises a thief when he steals. Basically, feed himself. But if he is caught, he must pay 7-fold. That thief got caught last night. Also the thief, as Jesus said in John 10:10, the thief comes but to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And by the way, I get the feeling that someone is actually praying for me right now after hearing about the second dream. And as you're praying, I thank you for praying for me, that truly only the Lord's will be done. Because that last night was tremendous. So to you who are praying for me at this very moment, I thank you. May the Lord bless you in return. So I pray this blesses you. In all things, remember, Jesus is Lord.